Gloved fingers touch the panel with cold precision, as if people's fates were just numbers. On the tables are a boy and a girl, dead calm but screaming silently in terror. One of the doctors clenches his teeth and orders an injection, his voice breaking into anger. A kernel of light bursts from the capsules like the breath of something unnatural, awakened too soon. The needle enters a vein, and the arm flinches, not from pain, but from a premonition of hell. The doctor at the monitor replies briefly that the vitals are stable, but you can hear the tension in his voice. Seconds later, the other snaps, blood pressure drops, and fear breaks through even the mask. Both turn sharply, and one whispers what? As if he can't believe what's happening. The guy on the table is twitching, his body shaking as if something inside him is breaking loose. His face is contorted in pain, blood pouring from his mouth, and his eyes roll back in unconscious agony. His eye opens in deathly terror, bloody tears streaming down his skin as if tearing from within. The body twitches one last time, and a clot of blood bursts from the mouth, flooding the silence. Both lie motionless, and one of those watching bitterly observes. Both are as dead as ever. The pulse screen remains blank, and the doctor utters with weariness, no response, failure again. The second doctor stares into the void and adds dryly, another failure, as if a familiar outcome. After stating the failure, one of the doctors freezes, eyes wide with inner shock. The other snaps, he can't take part in this anymore and demands that the study be stopped immediately. He is yelled back at, doesn't he realize how important this work is? He replies that he does, but also remembers how many have already died for the sake of these monstrous experiments. Against the background of the bloody body, a scream is heard. The experiment was doomed from the beginning, enough sacrifices. One of the doctors turns his back and walks away, saying, he won't be a part of this anymore. Something inside the remaining one seems to explode, and he stands in the center of the hall, surrounded by the dead. Another cautiously calls his name, Dr. Shin, with a tinge of alarm in his voice. The one turns around and asks defiantly, do you too think this research is pointless? He shouts that the test subjects would have died after a couple days anyway, so they weren't wasted. He looks at the bodies quietly and says, weren't those 2 or 3 days their lives? Dr. Shin freezes, and you can see it in his face, even he can't find the answer. He is told that the research has gone too far, and it's best to leave before it's too late. The remaining doctor remains silent, holding back everything that's boiling inside, as if words won't change anything anymore. Dr. Shin is left alone in the blank light of the monitor, head lowered under the weight of the choice. His voice sounds confident this study is bound to succeed, the only problem is the subjects. Pressing his lips together, he is convinced, somewhere out there is the perfect subject, the one who will fit perfectly. To make the experiment a success, he must find him, there is no other way. The sky above the city is calm, and nothing gives away that someone has already become a target. At the casual diner, behind the noise of dishes, no one notices as they begin to be watched. Johan sits at a table, lazily finishing his meal while an idle conversation is going on nearby. He looks up from his phone, throwing in a sarcastic, what a bunch of crazy people, and who watches them? His friend nods at the news screen, grinning, people will do anything for attention. The screen shows zombie attack, which turns out to be a viral prank, and everyone laughs. Johan sighs and jokes that maybe he should go to X-tubers too, at least it's not sickening. Johan turns around to hear a guy named Kong Ihwan calling his name. He gets curious and asks seriously, do you think zombies can even exist? Johan frowns and waves him off, they're cleaning up dead bodies, not a time for nonsense. He adds that it's all a fake made up for the sake of the viewers, zombies don't exist. Kong Ihwan rolls his eyes, calls Johan a bore, and tells him to change if he's finished. Under a bright sky, Johan heads to the hospital with a colleague to pick up the bodies. The business card he holds in his hand reads Rest in Peace, and the name Kong Ihwan. The girl behind the counter is surprised to hear that it's a funeral parlor, clearly not expecting such a visit. She hurriedly explains that a patient died in the morning and asks to wait for processing. Johan looks puzzled at her reaction, thinking, strange, a funeral director in a hospital is a common thing. Johan looks around irritably, wondering why he's been poking around for so long and not coming back. Kong Ihwan appears, out of breath, and apologizes with a guilty smile for the delay. He jokingly complains about the spicy dish, and Johan wrinkles his nose, you're just disgusting. Looking around the empty hall, Kong Ihwan wonders why the hospital seems so dead. A staff member approaches them and suggests they go to the operating room, and Johan replies calmly, okay, lead the way. The operating room sign turns green, and one of the men clarifies, one man, one girl, right? There are indeed 2 people lying on the tables, bodies motionless, the light falling coldly and mercilessly. Kong Ihwan throws in with fake ease, Father and daughter, what a tragic scene, let's begin. Johan stares silently, his face hard, but it's as if something inside him is squeezed. He asks a question, they died in the accident, didn't they? Kong Yi-hwan calmly confirms. Johan notices that the man's body is mangled, while the girl's is almost completely intact. He clarifies, other than the wound on her arm, she doesn't even have any signs of surgery. Weird. Kong Yi-hwan waves him off with a chuckle. Come on, maybe she died before the surgery started. He reminds them that they're not forensic experts, and tells Johan to stop getting worked up. He then pulls out the instruments and tells them to start with the mouth, handing Johan the clamps. Kong Yi-hwan notices how tense Johan is, and says, I understand you, but we knew what we were getting into. Johan gently opens the girl's mouth with the clamps, and something inside makes him wince. Suddenly he twitches, something cuts him through his glove, and he exclaims in pain. Kong Yi-hwan asks if he cut himself on the tooth, and Johan replies, I think so, but it's okay. While examining the glove, Kong Yi-hwan notices a scratch and tells him to change gloves just in case. Kong Yi-hwan puts on the new gloves and offers to move the man's body first, asking Johan to help. Johan agrees, and the two begin to lift the body, counting, 1, 2. Kong Yi-hwan grunts with effort. The weight is clearly heavy, and he complains of discomfort. Johan suddenly stops, sensing something elusive, his gaze turning sharply to the side. On a nearby table, a girl lies motionless, but the atmosphere around her suddenly seems unsettling. Johan exhales sharply. The girl's arm, where there used to be a wound, now has clear skin. He stares in confusion. He swears he saw the wound, but now there's nothing there. Kong Yi-hwan irritably asks what's wrong with him again. Did he make it all up? Johan's eyes widen, and everything shrinks inside. There's too much weirdness, and it's getting closer to panic. He grabs his head, takes a step back, his body trembles, as if reality has begun to crumble right under his feet. Johan suddenly loses his balance and falls to the floor as if his legs were no longer obeying him. Kong Yi-hwan runs up in a panic, yelling his name and asking if he's okay. He shakes Johan by the shoulders, but he only reacts weakly, as if he's passed out. Johan struggles to speak, his body. Something is wrong, everything feels strange inside. There's a look of terror on his face, sweat trickles down his skin, his breathing is hitching, and his eyes are full of panic. Kong Yi-hwan calls out to Johan in horror as he chokes on a scream, as if something is bursting out from within. Johan throws his head back, eyes wide open, lips quivering, and the name sounds like a final call. He feels his heart clench and mentally screams as pain pierces his chest. His heart feels like it's ready to explode, his temples pounding, every vein vibrating with pressure. Johan screams, unable to contain the heat burning him from the inside out. Johan's eyes are full of terror. He thinks, will he die like this, suddenly and senselessly? He looks at the blinding light of the lamps and mentally screams, no, I can't die like this. Plunging into the darkness, he struggles to hold on to the thought, if I die now, it's over. Kong Yi-hwan shakes him, desperately calling his name, trying to bring him to his senses. He shouts into the void in panic, someone help. There's a man passed out here. On the table, the girl barely moves, and her lips faintly whisper a name, Johan. Her body shudders as if returning from a deep forgetfulness, her breathing becoming slightly more tangible. Johan's eyes widen in shock, he clearly felt or heard something. He rises abruptly, chest heaving, and the room is as silent as before a storm. Looking around, he sits up and says, "Huh?" in surprise, not realizing what just happened. Johan woke up, gasping in a panic, not realizing why he was lying on the bloody floor. He stood up, holding his head, and pondered aloud that he was definitely at the hospital for work, after all. In the semi-darkness he heard a persistent drawn-out zo, and anxiously searched for where the disgusting sound was coming from. Turning around, he saw a figure in a hospital shirt slowly walking away down the hallway, leaving the door ajar. Johan stiffened as he noticed the bracelet on her wrist and exhaled in horror, "How the hell are you even alive?" Johan turned around abruptly, wary, sensing someone's presence. In front of him was a man staggering and covered in blood, clearly not himself. Johan recoiled in horror as he watched the man's face contort into a dead grin and blood pour from his mouth. He screamed in horror, collapsing backwards as if instinctively trying to escape from death itself. With his eyes frozen with shock, Johan whispered with disbelief, "This Jin Min Hyang?" Johan looks at his palms in horror. They are all covered in fresh blood, his fingers trembling. He recoils to his knees, staring in panic at the figure standing across from him. A girl with a bloody mouth stands before him, and her dead stare burns through the silence. Johan freezes, unable to utter a word as he continues to stare at his hands. The girl remains silent, just staring blankly, blood still dripping from her lips. The girl turns around and slowly heads for the door, as if in a trance, not reacting to anything. She knocks on the glass and Johan stays behind, watching confusedly amidst the bloodstains. He looks up at the electronic clock and fixes his eyes on the time in shock, 9:19 a.m., April 29th. Thoughts whirl through his head, what the fuck is going on? With eyes full of terror, Johan freezes and mentally asks, what the hell is going on in this fucking hospital? The dark hospital corridor stretches deep, and there is a wide bloodstain on the floor, as if a body had been dragged. The room is abandoned, the couch is overturned, everything is scattered, and someone is breathing heavily in the corner. Dawn is seen through the panoramic windows, and the man in the robe clutches his head convulsively in his palms. He stands over the dead body, silently observing the stillness of someone who is no longer breathing. Pressed against the wall, he shivers and snaps, it's over, there's no more fucking hope. The man ponders in panic, if no one has come in all this time, then everything is doomed. He grits his teeth, blaming some madman for bringing the world to this catastrophe. Suddenly his gaze snatches up a body that is barely moving, as if trying to rise. He stops abruptly, eyes widening, fear exploding inside, it can't be, it's a dead man. The body lies in a pool of blood, motionless, but the disturbing silence makes the moment almost unbearable. The man in the robe paces around the office, whispering in desperation that if he stays, he will surely die. He clutches the metal instrument in his hand, determined not to give up just like that. With a frantic stare, he rushes to the door, certain that he must get out of here, no matter what it takes. In the operating room, Johan is frozen by a body lying on a gurney with a punctured chest. He's breathing heavily, his eyes are bloodshot, and his face is contorted with panic bordering on madness. Johan falls to his knees, holding onto the gurney, and with a distorted face, he feels everything inside turn out. He breathes heavily, not understanding why he feels like he's starving to death. Leaning convulsively against his body, he feels a muffled growl erupt from his stomach, beastly and alien. He clenches his fist, gritting his teeth, and drives the thoughts away, realizing, now is not the time for doubt. Staggering, Johan heads for the door, where the girl is already standing, silently watching him. Clutching his stomach, Johan decides he needs to find someone and ask for help. As he passes the girl, he glances at her, but she is still watching him silently. He swings open the door with an effort, the green light shining ominously behind him, and steps outside. Johan freezes, turning around abruptly when he hears a strange noise from somewhere in the hallway. Up ahead in the dim light, he notices a man in a robe standing in a tense pose. Johan, panting, shouts out a plea for help, hoping that the doctor in front of him is really a doctor. The man in the robe is frozen, trembling with a confused face, not believing that this is a living person. Johan rushes forward, begging to save the wounded man, because someone is dying in the operating room. At that moment, something crashes with force like a hammer blow, interrupting the desperate scream. A girl with a bloody mouth rushes forward with a roar, breaking the silence with a fierce scream. The man in the robe waves his stick in panic, yelling at her to stay away and stay away. He retreats back against the wall, screaming out in terror, but the roar grows closer with each passing moment. With a howl of rage, a mob of zombies rush at him, knocking him to the ground and blocking out all light. He screams in desperation, choking on fear, but he is already surrounded on all sides. And so he screams, arching in agony as teeth gnaw into his body from all sides. A girl with crazed eyes is gnawing into his body, and screams of pain tear the air. Johan backs away in panic as the zombies pile on top of their victim, drenching everything in blood. He freezes in a stupor, his heart thundering and a red horror surfacing in front of his eyes. Turning around, he pivots back, as if afraid to even take an extra breath. In front of him stands a man with bloody clothes, slowly approaching with a heavy gait. Johan hardly recognizes the familiar face in front of him and whispers confusedly, Jinmin Hyung? The man stares at him silently, with a bloody chin and a hazy, faded gaze. His steps are slow and uneven, like a marionette being pulled by strings from the darkness. Johan doesn't move, not taking his gaze away as the figure silently walks past him. Jinmin Hyung approaches the group of zombies huddled in the hallway, busy doing something on the floor. Jinmin Hyung drops to his knees and sinks his teeth into the throat of the man below with a crunch. He throws his head back with an inhuman shriek, blood dripping down his chin. The rest of the zombies burst into the hallway, as if smelling a new victim, and rush forward as a pack. Johan covers his mouth with his hand in shock, unable to hold back a panicked groan. He backs away into the darkness, breathing heavily as footsteps and scrambling can be heard behind him. Johan freezes, the image of Jinmin Hyung, still alive, with a kind smile, flashes before his eyes. He panics, wondering if it's all just a nightmare and he hasn't woken up yet. Grabbing his head, Johan desperately says, "Wake up, Kongahang, wake up." His gaze becomes hard, drops of sweat rolling down his face, but there is no longer any doubt in his eyes. He turns toward the operating room, where he heads with heavy breathing, ready for the next step. Johan exhales heavily, trying to come to his senses after everything he's just seen. He looks around the operating room, listening intensely, as if something is keeping him awake. The clock reads 9:32 a.m., April 29th. But in his mind, it's the 24th. He's horrified to realize that he's been unconscious for 5 whole days, falling out of reality. Pulling out his phone, Johan checks the date and is stunned, unable to believe his own eyes. On the phone screen, Johan sees 21 missed calls and a message from Lee Chai-noon. He whispers her name, holding back his emotions, and there's anxiety and hope in his eyes. The messages plead, "Where are you? We're fine. Please answer." The words shake with terror. But the moment he tries to dial it, the screen flashes, the charge suddenly vanishes. Johan settles back against the wall, with the phone in his hands, plunged into silent despair. Johan tensely rises, thinking he doesn't realize what's going on, but sitting idle is not an option. He resolutely adjusts his tie, as if determined to go all the way no matter what. Clenching his teeth, Johan tells himself, if he wants to save Nuna and Minhee, he has to get out of here. Elsewhere, someone sits in the shadows of a store, shrinking into a ball and trembling with fear. The girl looks forward in tears and says with certainty, "They're definitely still out there outside." The man shouts in despair that if he goes outside, he will be torn apart. The girl in tears whispers through her trembling, "Somebody, please, let somebody come." The zombies wander down the corridor, slowly moving forward in an eerie, empty silence. The girl turns her head sharply, hearing quick footsteps and approaching breathing. Johan rushes down the corridor, breathing heavily, her gaze fixed on his approaching figure. Johan rushes down the stairs, and behind him figures are already gathering, slowly pulling behind him. He turns around, breathless, and his gaze meets that very girl's. She stands motionless, covered in blood, with a blank expression on her face, as if trying to understand something. Johan disappears downstairs, leaving her standing on the platform alone among the dead. Outside, night has enveloped the city, and the hospital looms amidst the darkness like the center of a nightmare. Johan snaps out of his seat, flying out of the building as if death itself is chasing him. He runs out into the street, barely able to stand, his breath hitching, his eyes darkening. Groaning in pain, he clutches at his stomach, one thought throbbing in his head, aching. Through the clammy sweat and panic thoughts, he wonders, is it really just hunger? The numbers on the clock burn the truth into his mind, he hasn't eaten in 5 bloody days. Johan stumbles to a halt, thinking that at this pace he'll collapse before he finds his sister. His eyes widen with fear as he realizes his strength is almost gone. Through the heat and fog in his head, a desperate decision emerges, he must eat. Barely able to keep his feet, he approaches the store, hoping to find something. Inside, it's chaos. The floor is littered with trash, like the aftermath of a panic and looting, but there's no food in sight yet. Johan drops to his knees in the middle of the trashed store, shaking with weakness but not giving up. He gulps down the burger without thinking, nearly choking on it from the rush and greed. Drinks his food down with something foamy, not noticing how it's all running down his chin and arms. He falls on his back, exhaling in relief and thinking that he can definitely survive now. Johan remembers with dismay that he didn't even look at what he had eaten, he didn't care. Johan sits amongst the garbage and thinks how ironic, he has always despised food from stores. He lifts his head, but his gaze is blank, as if something heavy is lurking behind his thoughts. In a flashback, a man appears in front of him, approaching with a tense, almost threatening gait. The scene changes, there are bodies lying on the floor in the hallway, someone else barely moving, and he watches. That same man looks into Johan's face and asks with pressure, does he really believe in zombies? Johan recalls several figures greedily gnawing into the body, tearing it apart. He presses his head into his palms, as if trying to push the crazy nightmare out of his mind. His eyes widen in panic, terror flares up inside as fire engulfs his entire body. He turns sharply, hearing a rustle in the store, and freezes with his hand raised. Johan whispers to himself that he definitely heard a sound, something lurking nearby, very close. Johan walks along the shelves, holding his breath, and each step sounds too loud in the silence. He reaches for the door, gritting his teeth, and turns the knob with tension in every movement. The door creaks open and he peeks inside, ready for anything, even terror. Johan steps cautiously into the room, his gaze clinging to every corner, tension rising. He notices a figure sitting on the floor with its back to him, and freezes, not knowing if it's alive or not. The figure turns around, and with a shriek, breaks out in a panicked, trembling voice calling for help. Johan is no less frightened, bouncing away in terror as if he's seen something dangerous or inexplicable. He rushes toward her, making his way through the narrow passage without taking his eyes off the shrunken silhouette. She presses herself against the wall, sobbing and shuddering, unable to utter a word. Johan is shocked, his face covered in sweat, and he barely squeezes out a stifled "D." Johan, trying to look calm, offers help with a strained smile, holding out his hand. Meanwhile, a man slowly approaches the store, his gait unnatural and intimidating. He keeps moving forward without stopping, as if he can smell the living from afar. On the floor in front of the girl appears a spread of food, everything she managed to scrape together from the store. She eats with shaky hands, holding back tears and wiping her face as if she can't believe what's happening. Johan takes a sip of water and warns her that it's easy to get sick with such hunger. Without listening, she drinks greedily, barely catching her breath between sips as if to escape her thirst. With a noisy exhalation, she pulls away from the bottle and cries out in relief, as if she's back to life. Johan asks if she feels better, and smiles in relief when she hears her thank you. She suddenly asks how he got here in the first place, and Johan chokes on his water in shock. Johan scratches the back of his head in embarrassment and confesses that he was just starving and ran out to eat. She repeats the last word with surprise, as if she can't believe it was that simple. Johan is startled by her reaction and hastily confirms, yes, he just went outside. He abruptly changes the subject, asking if the store has a phone charger. The answer doesn't take long to arrive. There are indeed power banks for sale in the display case. Johan decides to go outside, calmly saying she's going to go check outside. She cries out in panic, asking her not to open the door. After all, the zombies might have returned. Johan, trying to calm her down, opens the door and says that everything was clear when he came in. He stops abruptly when he hears something strange, and looks warily to the side. The same man is standing in the doorway, his gaze piercing and his face frighteningly focused. The eye widens dramatically, the pupil bloodshot, it reflects a wild, inhuman madness. Johan and the girl freeze in the doorway, gripped by fear as if they've stumbled upon a predator. He instinctively pulls her by the arm, stepping back while she shakes with terror. The figure ahead explodes with fury, emitting a bestial howl full of hatred and rage. Johan, dumbfounded, rushes to protect her, covering her with his body as she screams. The figure rushes forward with a fierce cry, aiming directly at Johan. Johan screams in fear, instinctively raising his arms, preparing to strike. At the last moment, he slams his palm into his opponent's face, as if pushing away the evil itself. The contact causes a powerful flash, and the attacker's body is thrown backwards with force. He flies away, pierced by an unknown force, and disappears in a whirlwind of sparks and light. The enemy's body lies on the floor, surrounded by puffs of smoke and bursts of energy. Johan stares at his hands in a stupor, as if he can't believe he did it. The girl behind him asks if he really just pushed that man. The man's face is distorted, his eyes red, his skin charred, but he's still giving signs of life. Johan, breathing heavily, whispers to himself that it's impossible, this can't be happening. Johan looks at the ruined passageway and can't believe he did it himself. He admits that he did push as hard as he could, but he didn't expect such an effect. Suddenly, however, another, far more important thought strikes him, making him go cold. He thinks back to all the recent moments, and realizes that the zombies have been avoiding him. Johan stands up, confused, and whispers to himself that for some reason they're not touching him. Outside, everything is still silent, the streets are empty, the city seems to be frozen in anticipation. The girl asks Johan in amazement if he really just pushed that zombie out. With a twisted face, he indignantly replies that he wasn't an adjussie at all. Clasping his hands together, Johan tries to bring the conversation back to the point by reminding him about the paver bank. She confirms that there is one, and points to the right department as Johan heads there. She looks after Johan and mutters that he's weird, but still trustworthy. Johan starts the ringer on his phone, praying that the connection still works. He walks between the shelves, holding the device to his ear, and whispers, "Please answer." Instead of a voice, an automated message is heard, "Caller unavailable, leave a message after the tone." Johan's eyes widen with fear, and he shudderingly asks himself, is he already too late? Against the backdrop of blossoming trees, Johan remembers his sister holding the hand of a little girl. Her face, her warm smile, so distant and dear to him, comes to mind. Tears come to Johan's eyes, and he cries out in despair that he can't accept this. He clutches the phone, not letting himself break down, and screams, "No, I don't know for sure yet." Johan tries to convince himself that maybe her phone just ran out of battery and she's still alive. Under the moonlight, Johan resolutely declares to himself that he must save his sister, no matter what it takes. He turns around, gathering his will in his fist, but realizes there's something more important to do before he does. Johan asks if she has a phone, and he hears that it's long since been turned off. He holds out a power bank to her, suggesting she try to call her family, in case they're alive. There is an ominous silence over the nighttime city, and the streets seem both empty and full of menace. Slow, heavy footsteps echo down the street, something threateningly familiar is approaching. Faces with dead expressions and bloodshot eyes slowly turn toward the store. The crowd walks forward without words, with hanging hands and blank stares like ghosts. The girl sobs into the phone, unable to believe her happiness. She has reached her mother. She assures her that she has been hiding in the store all this time, and worries whether her father is alive. Johan struggles to hold back her tears and exhales a sigh of relief when she sees that they are all right. The girl, shaking with sobs, tells him through her tears how she was saved by an adjussee. Johan is angry, his face twitching with resentment at being mistaken for a grown man again. He sits down on the floor, sniffing himself and thinking that maybe he stinks from not showering. Meanwhile, the girl is screaming into the phone in a panic, not understanding why her mother is suddenly talking about survival. The girl, still in tears, drops to her knees, and Johan stays by her side in silence. Through convulsive sobs, she continues to sob, wiping her face with a trembling hand. Johan watches in silence as she curls up in a ball, still repeating, sob sob. He turns his head, and an anxious, focused tension appears in his gaze. Johan's eyes squint sharply, determination flashes in them, as if he has realized something. Johan suddenly asks where her home is, and the silence around him makes the question especially abrupt. He says that he's going to leave this place and find his sister, even though the way is not close. Johan suggests that she go together if she wants to get out and find her family. The girl looks at him through her tears, silent, but there is uncertainty and confusion in her gaze. Johan turns around, noticing how she remains sitting still, as if hesitant to answer. Johan looks out through the narrow gap with a strained gaze, watching what's going on outside. Outside the storefront, zombies move among the overturned shelves and debris, snarling and scurrying about. He cautiously steps inside, stepping around the rubble and trying not to make a sound. The girl shivers, asking the question, if the zombie is outside, how is he going to get out? Johan remains silent, his gaze remaining calm as if he knew the answer long ago. Johan confirms that getting out will be difficult, and begins moving crates in preparation for the exit. He strictly orders the girl not to go outside under any circumstances, no matter what happens. Johan reinforces the door with a mop, warning her not to open it even at strange noises. He says he'll be back soon, and there's a quiet confidence in his voice. The girl looks at him in surprise, not believing that he's actually going to leave alone. Johan leaves, and the girl screams in desperation, begging him not to leave her alone. The door slams shut, leaving her on the other side, in a cold and frightening silence. She jumps up abruptly, heart pounding, eyes racing, in a panic she doesn't know what to do. Falling to the floor, she shrinks convulsively, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hide from reality. Tears stream down her face as she throws her head up in horror, hearing an unknown sound. The girl flinches at the loud noise, not knowing what is going on behind the door. Johan returns, leaning against the wall in exhaustion, and says that it's all over now. Her face flushes with shock and relief as she realizes that he actually survived. He moves closer and excitedly asks if she's okay after everything. Johan admits that he wasn't sure if it would work out himself, but now he's just glad to be alive. Johan stands in the midst of the destroyed store and pronounces, now he really feels alive. Outside, the streets are littered with bodies, and he confesses that he still doesn't understand the reason for his rescue. In the background, the dying man sounds a strange truth: the zombies are attacking everyone but him. Johan looks straight ahead and says it out loud, they're not biting him. In the next second, he's already in another room, surrounded by things, as if preparing for his next move. Johan examines the rack of clothes, carefully going through the pants in search of a matching pair. He picks up one of them and doubts if they're good enough to go out in. The girl's annoyed rejoinder sounds in his mind, she's not going anywhere without long pants. Johan suddenly stops and turns his head warily, as if he's noticed something. He looks at his reflection in the mirror and thinks discreetly that perhaps it will do. Johan looks at his clothes and thinks that since things have changed, it's time for him to change too. He glances at his old shirt, now dirty and worn. Changing into a warm hoodie and dark pants, he wonders aloud if it's time to move on. Johan walks out of the store, ready for a new phase, but clearly on guard. Suddenly he freezes, his face contorted with anxiety. Something has caught his attention. Johann notices a motorcycle standing in the middle of the street and immediately stops. The bike's glossy surface glistens in the sun, it looks powerful and almost pristine. Johann's eyes light up with delight, and he instantly loses his composure and mentally excuses himself. Approaching a familiar building, he warns that he is about to go inside. A confused voice is heard from behind the door, assuring him that she has already changed and he can go in. The girl shows off her chosen clothes with slight embarrassment, as if waiting to be evaluated. Johann scratches the back of his head and confesses that he simply chose what seemed trustworthy. He notices that there are no zombies visible nearby, and suggests they quickly gather supplies and leave. Finding baseball bats, he offers to take them in case of an unforeseen threat. The girl hesitantly asks if it's definitely worth it, and Johann freezes, wary. The girl painfully admits that she feels guilty. Johann is only risking himself because of her. He tiredly reminds her that he's not such an old man, and she shouldn't worry about him. Johann calmly says that she doesn't have to worry so much, it was his choice. He opens the door and adds that he might need help himself one day. Turning around, he says calmly and composedly, the zombies aren't biting him, and that's what matters. A full moon rises over the dead city, illuminating the ruined streets. The zombies stand at the intersection, staring fixedly into the darkness, as if they sensed something. One of them turns around, his face contorted in tense anticipation. Amidst the shouts and roar of the engine, a motorcycle roars into the crowd, breaking the silence. Johann notices that the zombies are slow to react, and wonders if it might be because of him. Johann rushes forward, glancing in the mirror and hoping it's enough to break away. Clenching his fists, he mentally screams at his sister to hold on, begging her to be safe. He promises he'll definitely come back for her, and disappears into the nighttime emptiness of the city. A gas station appears on the horizon, drenched in moonlight and shrouded in an unsettling silence. Zombies slowly wander between the columns, and Johann cautiously approaches without losing his concentration. The stranger sits against the wall of the abandoned gas station, exhausted and devastated, with a bottle in his hand. He stares at it in silence, wondering if it's the last bottle of water he'll ever have. With despair, he thinks that he is definitely doomed now, with nowhere else to go. He curses fate for ending up in a looted store, where even the pantry is empty. On the ground is a notebook labeled Exclusive Reporter Kim Gaidu, and he jokes bitterly that his life is one continuous exclusive story. The man turns around abruptly upon hearing something strange, and his face expresses alarm. He freezes as he listens, wondering if it's the sound of a motorcycle. With strain, he whispers that the noise is getting closer, and sweat breaks out on his face. His eyes widen with tension, he begins to realize that everything could change. With sudden surprise, he exclaims that it's impossible, as if he can't believe his own feelings. Johann and the girl stop at a gas station, getting off the motorcycle just under the light of the headlights. The man watches them in shock, thinking they're crazy to get off here. He realizes it's dangerous, but decides to get their attention, because he can't delay. A sharp shout comes from behind him, and he flinches, turning around with obvious fright. Wide-eyed, he shouts, "What?" in panic, realizing that the situation has changed drastically. One of the zombies falls forward with a muffled growl, and the man jumps back in panic. He notices with horror as a clawed paw slices through the air just centimeters past him. Johann swiftly rushes into the frame, delivering a powerful blow with his bat right into the dead man's chest. Another zombie flies sideways from the powerful blow, and its body flies back against the wall. Johann frantically throws a second blow with all his might, the sound of bones cracking fills the air. Johann brings the bat down on the zombie with all his might, and there is a deafening crunch and a cry of pain. The man is stunned by what he sees. He can't believe such unreal strength. One of the zombies rushes forward with a fierce shriek, its scream piercing the silence. A wide-eyed man shouts to Johann to watch out for an attack from behind. Johann turns around sharply, noticing a new threat rapidly approaching him. Johann and the two beside him freeze as someone's furious roar pierces the street as a signal for chaos. Johann raises his head sharply, and a look of anxious bewilderment flashes in his eyes. What was that? A figure flies out of the darkness with a garbled scream, one of the boys rushing away, the other clinging to the bike. Johann wastes no time, he kicks it with a swing, and the body flies into the wall with a thud. As one of them breathes heavily against the bike, the other says something like that, and silence falls again. Johann gazes into the glass with trepidation, certain, if his eyesight doesn't deceive him, he's right. Someone is watching Johann stunned. The zombies really aren't biting him, that's a fact. Johann says he didn't notice running out of gas, but the gas station was close by. Suddenly, Someone calls out to him from the street, the voice sounding sharp and unexpected, causing him to turn around. Yo-han, glowing with excitement, runs out of the room, exclaiming that he finally found it, a scoop. After Yo-han's shout, the two by the bike look at each other in silent confusion, not knowing what to think. From high above the gas station, everything seems dead quiet, no movement, no sign of danger. Yo-han greedily drinks water straight from the bottle, sitting on the floor among the empty racks. He laughs in relief, admitting that he was about to die of thirst and thought he wouldn't live to see it. When asked how long he had been hiding, Yo-han replies, 3 days, just water and nothing else. Yo-han chews his food greedily, reasoning aloud that even the heavens have not abandoned him yet. He raises a finger, suggesting that they at least introduce themselves to each other. It's fate, after all. The man with the notebook is the first to say his name. He's a journalist, 32, and his name is Kim Do. Next, the girl, a little embarrassed, calls herself Park Jin-ah. She's 20, a university student. Yo-han looks at them calmly and says, his name is Kong Yaiwan, 28, and he works at the morgue. Park Jin-ah notices with interest that Yo-han doesn't look like someone who works at the morgue at all. Yo-han, noticing her gaze, is embarrassed and asks why she's looking at him so intently. Park Jin-ah recounts with surprise that he's 28 and jokes, so he's not an adjusee. Kim Do curiously asks if something important happened between them before they met. Park Jin-ah smiles and tells her that she got stuck in a store and Yo-han came and rescued her. Kong Yaiwan and Park Jin-ah laugh as they remember how they didn't even have time to exchange names in the midst of all the commotion. Kim Do sympathetically remarks that they had a hard time too, but suggests they take their time with their stories. He abruptly changes the subject, saying he wants to ask an important question, and looks at Kong Yaiwan. Kim Do absent-mindedly asks if it's true that zombies don't bite Kong Yaiwan, not hiding his excitement. Meanwhile, horrible sounds can already be heard outside the walls. The zombies are out hunting again. A pack of zombies howls as they move down the street, their mouths open and their bodies swaying as if in a mad trance. One of them suddenly chokes on its own blood, recoiling violently and letting out a wild wheeze. From above the gas station, a panorama of the street opens up, where the zombies begin to strangely retreat to the side. Inside, Yo-han reveals that he passed out right in the morgue, and didn't wake up until 5 days later. He admits that he doesn't remember much, he just had trouble breathing and collapsed to the floor. Kim Do clarifies if he got it right. Yo-han escaped from the hospital and found Park Jin-ah in the store's warehouse. He continues, recalling that Park Jin-ah had been hiding for 5 days and Yo-han was looking for his family. Kim Do remarks that Yo-han must really not know what happened in those 5 days. Park Jin-ah looks worried and asks, what happened in that time after all? Kim Do, lowering his gaze, says gravely, in 5 days, the world turned into a zombie apocalypse. Kim Do remembers how the first 2 days were a living hell, people were dying without even realizing why. He says the zombies attacked those closest to them, friends, family, co-workers. Yo-han is tensely silent, not knowing how to react, because this all sounds like madness. Kim Do falters when he sees Park Jin-ah's eyes fill with tears. He didn't mean to hurt her. He apologizes and tries to reassure them, telling them that their families are probably safe. Kim Do assures with a soft smile that if the call went through, it means their loved ones are alive and they'll meet up. Park Jin-ah nods with a warm smile and quietly agrees, as if clinging to that hope. Kong Yaiwan glances at her, as if slightly cheered by her reaction. He raises his head and asks Kim Do how he got into this situation in the first place, since he's a journalist. Kim Do sighs and admits that he missed the moment of salvation by getting caught up in the search for reasons and the truth. Kim Do continues to tell how his car stalled and he ended up at an empty gas station with no way out. Yo-han asks what he thinks is the reason for everything that's happening, but Kim Do goes off the deep end. Suddenly, Kim Do turns around abruptly, clearly catching on to something, and interjects in confusion. Outside the glass, a group of silhouettes appear as if out of nowhere, pressing against the windows with eerie sounds. Yo-han recoils in horror, screaming, and Kong Yaiwan instantly stands up, blocking Park Jin-ah. Yo-han looks outside in panic and exclaims that zombies surrounded the building while they were talking. He says through clenched teeth that they need to get out immediately, but the motorcycle is no longer usable for escape. Yo-han checks with Kim Do, since he mentioned a car, does that mean it's nearby? Kim Do replies that he parked it nearby, and if he has time, he can bring it here. Yo-han clutches his weapon, preparing to fight, saying that he needs to break through the crowd of those things first. Yo-han clutches the bat in his hands as he prepares to make the final push. There's no turning back. He firmly declares that he'll clear the way himself, and orders the others to hold the door. Kim Do asks in shock how he's going to get through the horde alone. Yo-han says calmly without turning around, now everyone knows, the zombies won't bite him. He turns to Park Jin-ah and promises with confidence, he will definitely take her home. Park Jin-ah looks directly at Yo-han, reminding him that he promised, which means she believes him. Yo-han nods silently and confidently says it's time to go, he's ready. Turning around, he offers to just call her Jin-ah, no formalities. Park Jin-ah says with a slight smile that she doesn't require deference to age and wants equal companionship. Yo-han turns around in silence, but there's warmth in his gaze, as if he's accepted her words. Yo-han smiles warmly at Park Jin-ah and says he's leaving as promised. Kim-do thinks with a wry chuckle that he seems to have gotten himself in trouble with the uneasy couple. Yo-han is already walking out to the gas station, his figure moving between the columns before the zombies notice yet. But their attention is quickly awakened. The two zombies turn sharply in the direction of the movement. And at the same instant, water rushes out with force, knocking someone over with a powerful stream. The powerful jets of water continue to splash in all directions, knocking the zombies to the ground. Yo-han delivers a sharp blow to the equipment, further increasing the pressure to create a barrier. He glances glumly toward the entrance and firmly states that no one is allowed inside. Outside, the zombies pile haphazardly onto the closed doors, clawing at them and pounding in fury. One of them raises his hands to the sky and shouts with a monstrous roar as if calling out to the others. One of the zombies lunges forward with a snarl, but in the next instant, something powerfully hits him from above. Yo-han swings the blow, and the body of his opponent flies aside, breaking everything in its path. He turns his head and sees another zombie slowly approaching from the side. Without hesitating for a second, Yo-han deftly slaps his palm on its face, preventing it from attacking. He then rushes forward with a jerk, bursting through the darkness with a force like punching through a wall. Yo-han walks calmly amongst the zombies, noticing that it's not just that they don't attack, it's as if they don't even see him. He looks ahead and admits that he doesn't understand how it works, but it doesn't matter now. The bat slams into the ground in front of him with a thud, like a symbol of a boundary. Yo-han speaks firmly, no one will go beyond this point, he won't allow it. While Park Jin-ah and Kim-do watch in silence, Yo-han stands in front of the horde, ready to defend. Kim-do watches in amazement as the zombies completely ignore Yo-han, as if he's invisible to them. He is amazed not only by this, but also by Yo-han's strength, wondering if these phenomena are related. Park Jin-ah silently stares forward, her face pale with tension and anxiety. Yo-han is fighting the zombies in a furious spurt, his movements fast and desperate. But in the midst of all this, he suddenly feels a burning sensation in his stomach and mentally confesses that he is hungry. Yo-han fights off the zombies, reflecting that he hadn't really eaten that long ago. But the sensation of hunger seems to come over him, just like that time, over and over again. He remembers that he brought food with him, and furiously punches the zombie as if in a hurry to finish it. Clenching his teeth, he thinks he should just kill them all and eat, then he'll feel better. Park Jin-ah sits in the dark, shrinking and trembling, as if she senses something strange happening to Yo-han. Yo-han stiffens as if something has clicked inside him, his eyes full of tension and disturbing insight. He walks through the hall, past bloody bodies and the living dead who ignore him. The girl from the balcony clutches at the railing in panic, calling out to her brother, voice shaking with terror. Downstairs, everything explodes into chaos. Zombies rising, people screaming, someone dropping a bat, losing control. Yo-han, covered in sweat, gulps for air and wonders with despair why Gina popped up in his head. Yo-han's thought scares him to the point of shivering. Is he really turning into one of them? He stares in horror at the approaching zombies, their faces lifeless and their eyes burning with a dead light. The girl rushes to the railing and calls out to Yo-han in a panic as the man tries to stop her. He warns that if she gets out, the zombies will pounce on her, but she can't leave Yo-han behind. A scream rips the air and both turn around sharply, shock and fear of the unknown red in their eyes. The scream echoes in the darkness, but in the next second, Yo-han strikes with fury, a powerful blow. He pounces, crushing his opponent with a fury that is hard to contain or explain. Blood flying sideways, the blows follow one after another, without stopping, without hesitation. Yo-han clenches his teeth, his face contorted, he loses himself in this madness and destruction. Yo-han's hands clutch at the man's throat, and he screams in pain, eyes popping out of his orbits. Yo-han breaks down in hysterics, hitting the man already lying there with fury, each blow a flash of rage. He stands among the bodies, his breathing ragged, his surroundings drenched in blood and the silence of the storm. Yo-han's chest heaves, his face contorted, his eyes full of terror at himself. The girl looks at him anxiously and whispers that he seems fine, but has clearly changed. Yo-han turns away trembling and replies hoarsely, firmly, "No, it's not like that with him at all." A multitude of bloody mouths flash through his mind, but Johan fiercely insists that he's different. He clenches his fist so hard that his knuckles turn white and declares, he's a human being, not a monster. Johan, covered in sweat and blood, whispers through gritted teeth that he will never be like them. He drinks the water greedily, the drops running down his face as if to wash away the remnants of terror. Johan apologizes for being greedy, but the man replies that he has saved them more than once, and deserves more. Johan smiles and assures the girl that he's fine, just weak for a second. The man remarks that even if the zombies don't bite, it's still hard to fight with their numbers. Johan remains silent, lowering his gaze as if he's struggling with something inside, unable to find the words. He admits to himself that the feeling of hunger has suddenly disappeared, but there is still a strange emptiness inside. Johan lowers his eyes, anxiously feeling his heart clench with inexplicable fear. Johan suggests using the man's car, believing it to be the safest option at the moment. He adds that it's worth finding a gas station and getting fuel in case things go to hell again. They agree to act together, but Johan warns that it's still too dangerous outside. Suddenly, a man leaps out of the darkness, screaming desperately and begging for help. Johan turns around abruptly, and the man behind him curses and panics, asking what the hell is going on again. The man exclaims in despair that it's worth the silence, as a new threat pops out. Johan looks at the stranger carefully and hesitates. He doesn't look like a zombie, does he? The stranger screams, begging for help, stammering that his friend is dying. He leads the wounded man, holding out his hand, repeating that he's dying, and he begs them not to leave. The girl fearfully whispers to Johan that maybe he should help, and he hesitates, not knowing how to proceed. Johan looks away and says that perhaps they should proceed with caution. The man squeezes his chin and reminds him, just because someone isn't a zombie doesn't mean they're safe. The girl insists that they shouldn't turn their backs on those who are alive and asking for help. Johan agrees, assuring her that what matters most right now is saving every life and sticking together. The man sighs heavily, lowering his arms. If they both insist on it, there's no choice left. The girl turns the knob, opening the passage, and gestures for him to come inside. She looks over her shoulder and tells the people outside to come in this way. A man bows with a grateful smile, and another man is barely on his feet, leaning against him. The wounded man tilts his head heavily, his body slumped as if he is on the verge of losing consciousness. Inside the shadows, one of the men abruptly lowers his gaze. An ominous shadow appears on his face. In the background of the gas station, night falls, the streets fall into an unsettling silence. One of the men holds out a bottle of water, and a low voice sounds in response, "Thank you very much." Johan and the others stand over the body. No one understands why the man suddenly lost consciousness. The man asks glumly if he's been bitten, but gets a startled denial in response. The injured man's friend assures him that it all started in the morning, and if there had been a bite, they would have been hurt by now. Johan watches silently as the man next to him hums thoughtfully, assessing the situation. He asks if they have any plan, but gets an unsure answer about finding shelter. The man remarks skeptically that it is too naive to hope for help now. The girl interrupts him abruptly, stating reprovingly that she should stop being sarcastic, especially at a time like this. She looks straight ahead and adds that they survived because of Johan, and now they should help each other. The wounded man smiles weakly and gratefully whispers that he appreciates it very much. The man next to Johan sighs and admits that he may have been too harsh. He clarifies that the car mentioned is an SUV, which means it can safely accommodate 5 people. Johan clutches something like a crank in his hand and says he'll ride separately on a motorcycle. He adds that it might be safer if he goes first and scouts the road. Johan suggests getting to the car faster, since they were going to leave here anyway. The man agrees reluctantly, glancing at the girl sitting next to the injured man. She says confidently that she'll stay and watch over the injured man while they get to the car. Johan turns around and promises that they'll be back soon, asking them to wait here. He exits first, holding a weapon in his hand, followed by the man, briefly tossing, "Let's go." The girl silently watches the man lying there, as if trying to catch the slightest movement. He remains unconscious, but in the tense silence, one senses that something is wrong. Meanwhile, Johan and the man walk out to a car parked outside an empty building. Johan wonders why the man is so wary, since the men didn't seem dangerous. The man replies in annoyance that he has learned in 5 days that evil is not always seen on faces. Johan looks away in silence and hears the man say that no one can be trusted in a situation like this. Johan asks why the man himself was the first to approach them and speak. The man admits that he lost his mind for a moment, hoping for a scoop, and was on the verge of dehydration. Johan recalls being called a sensation at the time, and wonders why exactly. The man turns around, chuckling slightly, and asks, "Did Johann still not get it?" The man says with a serious look that if the zombies don't touch only Johann, that's the real sensation. Johann's stomach rumbles loudly and he awkwardly lowers his gaze, trying not to attract attention. The man notices this and asks him with a smile if he's hungry, and Johann confusedly answers in the affirmative. The man agrees, not surprising after such carnage, and offers to look for food when they get out. Johann is still holding his stomach, silent, with a slight doubt in his eyes, as if something is troubling him. Johann stops abruptly, his eyes widening, something instantly alarms him. He turns toward the street, tense, as if he's caught a glimpse of danger in the air. The man notices this and anxiously asks what's wrong and why he's so tense. Johann, frowning, says that he just heard something strange, like a rustle or a sound. The confused man replies that he didn't hear anything, and asks anxiously, "Is it a zombie?" Johann tensely says that he's sure, he heard Gina's voice, and it can't be a mistake. In front of him is a building, toward which he looks warily, as if it's drawing his attention. A desperate female scream comes from inside, and the zombies rush towards the source of the noise. The girl inside bursts out, screaming, demanding to be let go, struggling against someone's arms in panic. The one holding her whispers coldly that if she doesn't shut up, the zombies will come running to her screams. The muzzle of a gun is pressed against the girl's head, and panicked terror is frozen in her eyes. The man with the twisted grin whispers to her that if she squeaks, she'll be dead in a second. He laughs, not believing that they so easily believed their lies, calling it stupidity rather than naivety. One of them hesitates to start now, since Johann and the man might be back soon. The ringleader only chuckles and says it doesn't matter, those aren't immortal, so there's no difference. He grabs her face with a crooked grin and whispers that it's okay to take her hostage. Her eyes filled with fear and disgust, but she remains silent, clenching her teeth. Clenching her fists, she pressed them to her lips with trembling hands, holding back a scream. He howled in pain and rage, as if he'd received an unexpected blow to his ego. Cursing with foam at the mouth, he slapped her face with a swing. Her body jerked to the side, her face twisted in pain, blood pouring from her lips. One of them yelled that the pain was hellish, and the others began to scoff at the situation. He stated glumly that he wanted to deal with his enemies first, but they had no choice. Another joked with a nasty grin that it turned him on to be bitten by non-zombies. They were discussing how she was too beautiful to just throw away, better to keep her. After their foul words, her hands clutched at the clump of clothes, her breathing hitched in horror. One of them sneeringly suggested that even the others would want to join them. Suddenly someone bursts into the frame and punches one of the rapists in the face with fury. His body flies into the air from the powerful blow and falls to the floor with a clatter. The rest of the shocked screamers notice Johann walking towards them with an icy stare. After stepping forward confidently, Johann's eyes flash with a bright scarlet light. She lies unmoving, with her face smashed and her eyes closed, as if unconscious. Johann looks at her, and his gaze grows even darker, filled with determination. The car screeches to a halt, tires skidding off, leaving a black trail on the pavement. One of the men shrieks, calling her name, panic and fear in his voice. He slumps down beside her and calls out to Gina in panic, begging her to open her eyes. Gritting his teeth, he curses, realizing that something was wrong all along. Johann gives a short command, "Take Gina to the car and don't hesitate." With a cold face and burning gaze, Johann whispers that he'll catch up with them all soon. Meanwhile, one of the men is seen at the car. He carefully seats her inside. He finishes refueling and is relieved to tell himself that the tank is now full. Inside the car, he thinks about the fact that the zombies didn't show up, but it could happen again. The silence in the cabin is tense and he tensely stares ahead, sensing the threat approaching. In the seat next to him, she's wrapped in a blanket, motionless, as if trying to cover herself even in sleep. He looks away and thinks they've realized firsthand what the world has become. He looks at her, whispering quietly that Gina is safe now and may not be afraid. Outside, Johann stands in the darkness, his gaze blazing. He will protect her to the end. Johann's eye flashes with a bloody light. The rage in him is boiling over with every passing second. Laughter and jeers fill the air. One of his attackers mocks his gaze from top to bottom. They, armed and cocky, laugh, thinking that Johann can't do it alone. Johann stands in silence, not saying a word, his face hidden in the shadows. He slowly walks forward, and the footsteps sound ominous in the empty room. One of them chuckles, deciding that Johann has given up and realized his helplessness. With a sneer, he warns that even pleading won't help, there will be no mercy. But the other, frowning, notices that something is wrong with Johann and causes alarm. Johann reflects on how recently his rage drove him almost to madness. Now, however, There is a strange calmness in his body and a frightening emptiness in his mind. He walks forward, dropping his arm heavily as if his body were moving on its own. With burning eyes he whispers that he is hungry and loses the remnants of his mind. A surge of blood floods everything around him. The madness in him has broken through. A severed arm lies on the floor in a pool of blood, and a weapon lies nearby. One of the survivors looks on in horror, his face contorted with panic. In the darkness, Johann leans over the body, his shadow looming ominously over the victim. His face is in a haze of vapor, his mouth bloodied, his eyes glowing with a mad scarlet light. He rises slowly, leaving the mutilated body behind, as if satiated. Johann approaches the body lying against the wall, never taking his eyes off his remaining opponent. The one backs away in horror and mutters that Johann was definitely not a zombie before. There is panic on his face, his hands are shaking, and he can barely hold his weapon. Johann raises his head, the entire lower part of his face is covered in blood, his gaze is cold. Panic-stricken, the enemy yells and aims, screaming in fear and helplessness. The gunshot breaks the silence of the night, echoing off the buildings of the gas station. Fingers squeeze the trigger with force, and the gun fires in desperation. Johann stands with his mouth bloodied, as if the gunshot only irritated him. He calmly picks up his bag and heads inside without losing his stride. Meanwhile, outside, one of the men jumps out of the car upon hearing the gunshot. He abruptly turns around with a look of shock on his face upon hearing the sound from the gas station. Johann appears in his field of vision, calmly walking out of the building. With concern in his voice, he asks Johann if he is okay after what happened. Johann answers briefly and confidently, and then asks about Gina's condition. Slightly confused, he says that she's sleeping and she seems like she'll be fine. He sighs in relief and says that's good to hear, and then hands Johann the gun. Johann calmly replies that it would be better if he kept the gun. The man is surprised, not understanding why he would want one. After all, it's a real gun. Johann turns away, and the man admits that he will listen to him without question. But after a moment, he anxiously asks if Johann is really all right. Johann stands by the car with bodies scattered around. The situation seems like the calm before the storm. With a smile, he says that of course he's fine, he has no reason to feel bad. The man looks at him doubtfully, but suggests we leave before the zombies swoop in. He casts an anxious glance at the building, as if sensing that this isn't the end. Clutching the gun in his hand, he stares silently ahead, unable to find words for his thoughts. He runs his hand through his hair tiredly, as if trying to gather his thoughts. With a command, he gets into the car, and it starts smoothly. They speed through the streets of the night city, sirens and headlights breaking through the darkness. The driver is tense, focused on the road, and there is an inner tension in the silence. Suddenly Gina opens her eyes, mumbles a word, and he looks at her in surprise. The car rushes down the road, and he anxiously asks Gina if she is awake and how she feels. He reassures her, telling her that those bastards are over and now we can exhale. Johann assures her that she has nothing to worry about from now on, he'll always be there for her. She calls his name quietly, looking ahead into the night where the headlight cuts through the darkness. Gina's eyes fill with tears, and one of them slowly rolls down his cheek. He turns to Gina apprehensively, seeing her crying, and asks her if something hurts. With a tremor in her voice, she asks why people did such cruel things to her. Through her tears, she says that she just wanted to help, but all she got was pain and humiliation. She recalls how in times like these people should unite, not turn into monsters. Sobbing, she confesses that now she can no longer trust anyone in this world. He remains silent, clutching the steering wheel as if not knowing what to say to her tears. After a pause, he admits that in a world like this, distrust is probably the smart choice. But immediately adds that even if no one can be trusted, Johann she can trust to the end. The words sound confident. Johann will protect her no matter what happens. The car approaches the high-rise, its headlights cutting through the silence of the night. There is silence at the building's entrance and in the hallway, with only a dim light illuminating the way. Inside the apartment, the infected man appears, his movements abrupt and his breathing intermittent. With a scream and wheezing, he lunges forward, his mouth gushing blood. Johann lands a blow with force, and the zombie's body falls to the floor in a pool of blood. He exhales a sigh of relief and looks around to say that there doesn't seem to be any more zombies. Johann was about to take everyone to safety, but he is abruptly interrupted by the shock of what he sees. On the wall in front of him hangs a family photo, a happy couple with a child, covered in blood. He stares at it silently, as if trying to understand how everything turned to hell so quickly. There's a body lying on the floor nearby, the man is dead, blood sprawled around him, and Johann is whispering an apology. There are voices outside, everything has been checked out, the only rooms left are the ones that weren't locked. Those still alive finally find shelter, and Johan is relieved to be able to catch his breath. He sits down on the floor, and the other guy doubts whether to stop. After all, they have a car. Johan explains that it's late, everyone's exhausted, and at least it's a little safer during the day. He adds that Jean needs a break, as she needs to recover before traveling further. Johan looks toward the room and quietly wonders if Gina will survive all this. Johan gets no comfort. The guy next to him confidently states that Gina is definitely not okay. He looks at her, covered in her blanket, and talks about a world where you can't even trust people. Johan is silent, but there's anxiety and something heavy in his gaze that won't let up. The boy continues, that's why Johan is so important, his presence means something. He clarifies, if there's one person Gina trusts besides her family, it's Johan. After a pause, the guy with the disheveled hair says that it's Johan who is important to Gina. Johan brushes it off with embarrassment, reminding her that they first met today in the first place. The interlocutor nods. Too much has happened in one day, and it's no longer surprising. He shows his notebook and confesses that he was looking for a hiding place for Gina, but also for Johan himself. Looking straight ahead, he adds, even though he's no longer a journalist, he wants to ask something personally about Johan. Johan tenses, his face showing confusion, as if he is preparing for a difficult conversation. A voice comes from the radio, and he wonders aloud where to even begin the story. The guy across the hall asks bluntly, why the zombies aren't attacking and if Johan has any clue. Johan replies that it's not even just immunity, it's like the zombies don't notice him at all. His interlocutor frowns, and says thoughtfully that there's definitely a reason, but it's just hidden for now. Johan listens as his interlocutor notes that there is too little data, but every detail is important. He immediately moves on to a new question, asking if Johan was involved in sports or exercise. When Johan answers in the negative, he is surprised and confesses that this is what struck him the most. The scene of Johan easily taking down a zombie as if it were nothing comes to mind. Finally, the guy utters, no offense, but Johan almost doesn't seem human. The guy asks again if Johan really doesn't understand where this power comes from. Johan quietly replies that he doesn't know, lowering his gaze as if he feels guilty about it. He exhales heavily, admitting that he just can't turn off the journalist in him. Johan smiles and says it's all right, he doesn't mind asking questions like that. He suddenly remembers that Johan was looking for his sister, and now he wants to know if he knows where she is. Johan admits that he doesn't know exactly where his sister is, but he wanted to check their house first. He says she's in Yongyang and the roads might be destroyed, but he'll try anyway. Johan adds, she's his only family left, and he can't sit idly by. The guy opposite is confused. If the path is so dangerous, why is Johan helping others? Johan only grins and easily replies that he doesn't know, it just happens. The girl under the blanket whispers that it just feels right to do this. Her gaze becomes intense and attentive, and something vague but strong appears in her eyes. The guy with the disheveled hair admires Johan, calling him too kind for this world. Then he decides to stop, there are too many unknowns, and it's best not to dig deeper yet. He looks serious and adds, Johan has had the closest encounter with zombies, and that's why he wants to ask. The interlocutor asks, has Johan noticed something useful in the behavior of the infected zombies? Johan nervously scratches the back of his head and says he hasn't been watching them closely, so he's not sure. He assumes they still have their senses working, but he can't say for sure. They seem to be using sight and hearing, but even those reactions can be erratic and strange. Then the girl says sharply, zombies react to exposed skin, perhaps that's the key. Gina reveals that the manager managed to hide her in the storeroom before he was attacked. Johan anxiously wonders if she's sure she can get up yet, and she replies that she just can't sleep. She smiles softly and apologizes for making Johan worry. Johan tries to calm her down in return, saying that everything is fine now, the important thing is not to worry. When the subject of exposed skin comes up, Gina confirms, the more it's seen, the stronger the zombie's reaction. Guy remembers Gina asking for long pants, now he understands why that was. He annoyedly remarks that the more they learn, the more confusing things get, even the mechanism of transformation remains a mystery. Johan suggests they look for gloves or masks, anything that can hide their skin and help them survive. Gina suddenly calls out to them, saying that the radio was already on, and it seems that something can be heard through the noise. Through the crackle and interference on 108.8 MHz something does come through, making them tense up. Through the crackle, a voice comes from the radio, someone out there is still hoping to be heard. Johan listens. According to the announcer, today is the 6th day since the virus outbreak began. The camera fades into the silence of the night, where the voice continues, The fire of hope is slowly going out, but still smoldering. Johan is confused. Is the radio really broadcasting a real-time message? Gina confirms, it's 12:11 at night, it's live, but the martial law has been unchanged for 5 days. The guy with the disheveled hair suggests that the broadcast is indeed live, which means the station is alive. Johan has his doubts. Even if it's safe inside, it's almost like being trapped. He cautiously suggests a thought, perhaps it's not a broadcast at all, but a distress call. Gina reminds him that if it's an MBS station, it's not far away at all, and asks what to do. The guy hesitates, silently lowering his gaze, as if weighing a risk that can't be calculated in advance. The guy with the disheveled hair says that the decision should be left to Johan, and Johan is surprised. He confirms that if we go to the station, we must go together, otherwise who would risk going inside? Johan looks at Gina and decides that they should get her home to her parents first. He adds that once they're sure she's safe, they can revisit the issue of the signal. Gina looks at him with a soft smile, holding the radio receiver to her chest as if trusting every word. After a pause, the guy agrees to Johan's plan, crossing his arms and closing his eyes. Outside, the night is silent, and someone happily notices that the water is still running. You can wash up. Meanwhile, in the darkness, someone is running as hard as he can, his breath hitching, panic rising. His face is contorted with fear, he is breathing heavily, not looking back. Behind him, a crowd of zombies is already catching up with him. A crowd of zombies with wild screams is following him, ready to tear him apart. The crowd of zombies catches up with the runner, one of them grabs his leg, and he falls with a cry of pain. He shrieks, clutching his head as he is surrounded on all sides. Fear paralyzes him completely. Huddled together in the darkness, he shakes his whole body, covering himself with his hands as if it could save him. A close-up of Johan's face, he is in shock, sweating, with eyes full of anxiety and terror. Suddenly, a smiling man in a suit appears in front of him, beckoning him to go eat, as if from the past. He presses himself against the wall, heart pounding as the zombie shuffles past without even looking in his direction. Johan grits his teeth, one thought pounding in his head, passed by again. Why the hell? He stares at his hand, as if trying to figure out what's wrong with it, why they won't touch it. In the next second, the zombie pounces on the other guy, ripping the flesh apart to his shrieking yell. Johan doesn't move, standing like a stooped man, and realizes he didn't survive to save the day. The crowd squirms on the ground, and a voice behind him hoarsely orders him not to hesitate and just eat. The phrase "you like it too, right?" sounds vile, knocking him off balance. Like a demon, the man with the blotchy face hisses, "Don't you?" and smiles vilely. Johan is shocked by what he sees, his face and hands are covered in blood, and his mind refuses to accept everything. He wakes up abruptly, shrieking and breathing heavily, as if he had broken out of a real nightmare. Johan is breathing heavily, eyes racing frantically, and his heart is pounding as if it's going to burst out. He sits on the bed, clutching the sheet, trying to convince himself that it was just a dream. A rumble is heard in the hallway, and he tenses, not taking his eyes off the dark doorway. Johan stares at his palm, remembering the blood, the fear, and the crazy smile in that dream. He whispers, "No," as if trying to forbid himself from believing he felt it seriously. Johan, with trembling fingers and a frantic stare, whispers to himself through panicked obsession that never will he become like those things. A moment later, a heavy sky looms over the dead streets, crushing them with its oppressive, leaden silence. The high-rise with its closed windows and barricades looks like a last bastion, isolated from the decaying world. Inside, everything is frozen, dim lights glide across the furniture, and the air is saturated with fear and memories. Johan, opening his eyes in bed beside his body, thinks tiredly that the 6th day has come. Johan lies silent as she quietly says that the food has run out, but the water will keep them going a little longer. Looking at a picture of a girl named Gina, she anxiously asks herself if she is safe now. He, looking up at the ceiling with exhaustion, tries to believe that Gina was saved by a good man and is now in a safe place. She, holding back tears, whispers that even if she dies, she would just like to see her one last time. He wraps his arms around her from behind, whispering that he was able to say goodbye, and that's worth finding comfort in. He leaps up in alarm, a drop of sweat rolling down his cheek. What is that sound? He rises abruptly from the bed, stiffening and exclaiming that he's heard it before. Listening closely, he asks, "Is it a motorcycle, and does it mean someone else is still alive?" His eyes widen in shock as he realizes the sound has cut off right below their windows. In the courtyard, a man on a motorcycle stands between the zombies. The appearance of the living seems like an impossible miracle. Johan approaches the building, and nearby zombies wander around haphazardly, making agonizing sounds. Another man, still on the motorcycle, shouts to Johan in panic that the place is swarming with zombies. Johan looks at the crumpled piece of paper with the address on it and is convinced he's come to the right place. He notices that the zombies are silent and hiding, and guesses that someone might be alive inside. Clutching a metal pipe, he wonders if he should clean up first before searching. A zombie approaches Johan from behind, emitting hoarse moans, but he doesn't turn around. Instantly turning around, Johan brings the pipe down with fury right on the attacker's head. From their hiding place, the two watch this with horror and amazement, unable to believe what is happening. Johan continues to strike, clenching his teeth and leaving no chance for the dead man. The dead body falls to the pavement with a crunch, and the street is filled with the rumble of crowbars and screams. He stares down wide-eyed and whispers dumbfounded, "Who is this man and what the hell is he?" Johan walks down the body-littered street and sighs in relief, asking himself if it's over already. Looking around, he notices the wrecked cars and thinks that not everyone made it to this place. Cautiously, he decides to check the situation first so that Gina doesn't get an unnecessary shock. Hiding behind cover, the two watch Johan walking down an alleyway, unaware that he is being seen. Johan jumping over the fence causes an anxious whisper from above. Is he walking straight towards them? One of them asks at a loss whether to come out, but the other responds with doubt and fear. She breaks down into a scream, pressing her face into his, asking indignantly, they don't even know who he is after all. Johan calmly says he's come at Park Gina's request, looking for her parents. He stands at the door, and when he hears something inside, he says, "Huh." Quietly, preparing to knock again. They burst into the hallway with startled faces, shouting in shock that he had come at Gina's request. Johan, scratching the back of his head slightly confused, smiles nervously and squeezes out an uncertain hello. The city comes to a standstill under the heavy sky, as if everything around them held its breath for a moment. They run out with arms outstretched and scream for Gina, unable to believe what is happening. Gina, with a face contorted with emotion, rushes towards them, screaming, "Mommy! Daddy!" They hug Gina with desperate joy, through tears marveling at her courage and her return. The three huddle together, clinging to each other as if afraid of losing each other again. Johan watches them with a slight smile, standing back and silently rejoicing at their reunion. A guy with disheveled hair gently reminds them that it's dangerous outside and asks everyone to come inside. When their hands touch in a gesture of gratitude, one of them shudders with sudden excitement. He, unable to hold back tears, squeezes the hand tightly and vows to remember this kindness until the day he dies. The other, modestly averting his gaze, says that it was actually Johan who did it all, not him. Johan nods quietly, and together they head back to the house under a gloomy sky. The picture on the shelf seems to whisper how lucky they are, just incredibly lucky. He tells them that he left work early and it accidentally saved his life that day. Against the backdrop of a barricaded door, he recalls being on the verge of death several times just waiting to be rescued. Sitting next to Gina, he says that he had already said goodbye to life, not hoping to see her again. Lowering his gaze, he admits that he doesn't even know how to thank Johan and his companion. Johan replies respectfully that he only brought the help he himself received from Gina and Yuvan. He asks in surprise if it's true that they haven't been outside for 6 days, and receives a quiet confirmation. The electricity went out after 2 days, but the water kept running and that saved them. She says the food ran out just before that, and they were getting ready to starve to death. Johan listens in silence, looking down and finding no words for such a confession. He recalls that there was a supermarket nearby with the shutters closed, probably still intact. They assume that since the shutters are down and locked, the store has not been robbed. Johan speaks confidently, getting food from the supermarket should be the top priority right now. One of them stands up in alarm and asks if he's going to go outside among the zombies again. Johan explains that they can't survive without food anyway, especially since they haven't eaten in a while. Gina looks serious and agrees, even if they manage to bring her back, they need to think about the future. Yuan nods decisively, saying that now that the family is together, it's time to deal with the issue of survival. Johan reassuringly says that there's hardly anyone outside, and that they're well protected inside. When the man offers to come with him, Johan gently declines, saying it's not necessary at all. He smiles and explains, the most important thing right now is to be near Gina and regain his strength. Tears come to his eyes, and his face contorts with emotion. He kneels down in front of Johan and repeats the words of gratitude in a trembling voice. Gina remains silent, her gaze lowered and her face filled with an anxiety she cannot hide. Outside, Johan turns around and calmly says he'll be back soon. Yuvan asks Giddu in surprise if he's going to go with him too. Giddu, wearing his hood, explains that they need to take as much food and supplies as possible. He clutches the tools in his hands with determination, saying that he won't let everything hang on Johan. Johan turns around with a slight smile, as if trying to cheer up those around him before leaving. He turns to the door with Gadu and says confidently that they will definitely be back. All three of them tensely watch them, asking them to be careful and come back alive. Johan rushes forward on his motorcycle like an arrow, disappearing into the depths of the alleys. One of them whispers anxiously, wondering if they'll come back in one piece, since they could have just left after rescuing Gina. Gina looks ahead with firm confidence and says that she knows they'll be back. She remembers that Johan always comes back, no matter how dangerous it is. The supermarket looms before them, silent and closed, but within lies the hope of survival. They lift the heavy grate with effort, the crowbar biting the lock with a sharp sound. Inside is a huge warehouse, rows of shelves of supplies that could save someone's life. The guide laughs in amazement, unable to believe that the supermarket has survived and remained completely intact. They assess the supplies, and Johan says it's enough for a family of 3 for months. Smiling, he suggests they start picking up groceries as if it were a normal shopping trip. The camera slowly cuts to the broadcasting station building towering over the city. Outside the round window, someone in headphones interjects anxiously, "Is this really confirmed?" He holds the phone to his ear and says that he is not sure how much longer he will be able to broadcast. The anchor repeats the information aloud, writing it down quickly, as if afraid of missing something important. His hand trembles over his notebook as he asks if he misheard. What he said sounds too sudden. He sits in the dark studio and asks in a squeeze, "Is it really true?" The answer he hears silences him before he calmly wishes his interlocutor caution. He stares at the piece of paper in silence, as if hesitant to believe what he holds in his hands. Doubtfully, he admits that he's gotten some ridiculous information before, but this one is strangely consistent with the facts. Motorcyclist is boldly printed on the sheet, with notes such as "zombies don't bite" and "incredible strength." Johan carries a sack of provisions on his shoulder as if it means nothing. Watching him, one wonders in bewilderment. Who the hell is he? Johan steps cautiously down the deserted street, looking around with anxious anticipation of an ambush. He exhales a sigh of relief as he looks at the trunk, packed with food, water, and all the necessities. A friend smugly remarks that the supplies will last at least 6 months, surprising Johan. Someone suggests stopping by the pharmacy as well, causing Johan to nod approvingly. Crouching tensely by the door, Johan nervously peeks inside the pharmacy, afraid to disturb the hidden danger. Johan tensely slows his step, feeling a sudden sense of guilt for looting the stores. He calms himself with the thought that they are only borrowing a little bit of stuff to survive. The door of the drugstore is ominously ajar, the dark silence inside is unsettling. Johan asks his friend Yahello to stand guard while he takes a quick look around inside. He steps carefully between the shelves, reminding him to choose carefully, not grab indiscriminately. Johan flinches when he hears his friend's question and turns sharply toward the TV station building. Yahello stares pensively into the distance, as if he is troubled by something, but he remains silent. Johan steps outside with a box in his hands, anxiously asking Yahello what caught his attention. Yahello reminds Johan of yesterday's radio message coming from the MBS station building. Johan freezes next to Yahello, agreeing that Gina was right, MBS is just around the corner. Johan notices Yahello's anxiety and gently says that now is not the time to think about the radio message. Yahello agrees, but reminds him that Johan needs to find his sister soon too. They turn around, deciding to go back, get ready, and plan their way to Yongyong. Yahello falls gloomily silent, immersed in heavy thoughts about the future. He stares at his phone, rereading his sister's disturbing messages, resolutely promising himself to find her. Johan stares in surprise at the open door, trying to realize who his savior is. He quickly regains consciousness and looks around, tense and wary. The guy sitting on the floor thanks Johan in a trembling voice for saving his life. Johan responds calmly, saying that everything will be okay now, trying to cheer him up. Meanwhile, the menacing footsteps of approaching zombies are heard in the hallway, raising the alarm. Johan is slightly embarrassed to announce that he has to leave to find his sister. A man anxiously asks Johan where exactly he is going to go. Johan, slightly worried, explains that his sister lives in Yongyang and is probably still there. The man surprisingly warns that the roads to Kongwan province are now blocked and the journey will not be easy. Johan replies firmly that he realizes the risk, but he can't leave his sister behind, as she is his only family. The girl looks at Johan silently and tensely, waiting for his words. Johan, with his head slightly lowered, hesitantly starts a conversation saying that he wanted to ask something important. He seriously states that if he can save his sister and her family, he would like to bring them here. The girl flinches in amazement upon hearing Johan's request, clearly not expecting such a question. Johan confidently continues, explaining that there is no safer place, and that there is nothing particularly keeping his sister in Yongyong. Johan reminds her that thanks to his unique ability, immunity to zombie bites, he'll be able to help considerably. He adds that he won't be able to feel at ease until he's sure his sister Gina is safe. Smiling confidently, Johan promises to bring his sister and her family here safe and sound. The girl smiles softly, clearly touched by Johan's words and his genuine concern. The man replies to Johan, agreeing that they are always willing to accept new people if there is room. Johan recalls how his father angrily objected to the wedding, even though he allowed dating. Her mother ironically added that she didn't mind grandchildren early, causing her to shriek in frustration. The coming night envelopes the house and darkness seems to hang over the roof, plunging everything into silence. They sit by the dim candle, discussing how quickly it is getting dark without electricity and wishing they had brought more candles. Johan quietly replies that his parents are sleeping soundly upstairs because they are tired to the point of exhaustion. The guide continues to count intently, and the thought pops into his head that all the fatigue and stress must have taken its toll on the others at the same time. Johan, noticing his busyness, asks with interest what he's so engrossed in, and gets a calm reply, Giddu is just doing calculations. He meticulously writes down in his notebook how much food the two of them will need to get to Yongyong without straying from his thoughts. Johan is surprised to hear the two of them, and asks again, as if he didn't immediately realize that he was talking about the two of them. But in the next second, he exclaimed that he was going with him and, dumbfounded, asked if it was really to Yongyong. Johan, stunned by the decision, asks, why go into danger again when they had just found a safe place? Someone agrees with him, reminding him that a journalist's job is essentially to take constant risks, even if the journey is dangerous. The guide smiles and says that he enjoys sensation hunting, and he still wants to know more about Johan. He adds that whatever the opinions are, for him Johan is his own personal, exclusive story. Later, already near the cars, Johan remembers his earlier words. From now on, he must always obey him, no matter what happens. The guide assures him with a slight chuckle that he will not be a burden, and adds that he can be his personal journalist at the very least. Johan sighs and smiles with a slight awkwardness, as if he doesn't know how to react to such self-assurance. The guide says confidently that he knows the province's roads inside and out, and offers to leave the navigation to him, receiving his trusting agreement in return. Johan remembers another useful item and suggests he take it with him, catching the attention of the girl sitting next to him. She is surprised when he notices the radio receiver in her hands, and explains that the broadcast is still going on, so it certainly won't be superfluous. Johan sat with the others, and the tense silence only intensified as he voiced his doubts about the radios. Suddenly one of the boys jumped up, grabbed the receiver, and breathing heavily, announced a new disturbing report. The speaker said that this was the news that interested everyone more than anything else. Johan felt his insides tighten as he heard about the mysterious motorcyclist causing panic once again. He froze with a wild expression in his eyes, barely able to squeeze out, "Are they really talking about him?" Johan listened as the announcer clarified the mysterious man's route through Incheon, Bucheon, Gangsik, and Wagak, straight to the center of Seoul. The radio host admitted that he was hesitant at first to report the man, who is untouched by the infected. He explained that he had received repeated complaints from listeners asking him not to sow false hope. But while in isolation, he continued to air his stories to keep even the faintest spark of hope from fading. And now, despite his own fatigue, he wanted to say to those on the brink, "Don't give up." Johan lowered his gaze, repeating aloud what he had heard from the radio station. "There is hope, salvation will come." The other guy was surprised to read the host's name, Sung Jinchul, the producer of MBS Radio. At this time, Jinchul himself was starting a track, promising listeners a song to quiet their fear-weary hearts. He closed his eyes and exhaled heavily, allowing himself to relax for a moment to the tune playing. Through the semi-darkness of the room, he muttered softly, "Hope, huh?" As if he didn't fully believe in it himself. Sung Jinchul lay in silence and tiredly wondered how much longer he could continue this game of hope. Johan and the others sat silently by the dim candle, absorbed in their own anxious thoughts. One of them suddenly remembered that Jinchul had identified himself as the producer of MBS and asked if Hyunsu knew him. Hyunsu started digging through his pockets, recalling that he had heard the name somewhere before and might have even written it down. He pulled out his phone, flipped through the list, and confirmed, yes, Jinchul definitely worked in the radio department. Johan, remembering the radio, wonders with bated breath if the guy has been running it alone since that day. When asked about broadcasting, his interlocutor nods and confirms that yes, they do take any messages now. Johan looks away and says that maybe it's time to reveal the truth, he is that biker. The blonde turns around abruptly with consternation and surprise, not understanding why he's even going to do this. Johan, looking at the crowd of zombies behind him, says that they aren't biting him, but the reason is still unknown. Johan, still looking at the laptop, says that he doesn't want to give people false hope, because he doesn't think he's worthy of it. The person sitting across from him, understanding his feelings, warns him that in this world, even the truth can be dangerous. Johan, smiling slightly, agrees that it is risky to reveal his identity, but promises to be as careful as possible. He sighs heavily and admits that if Johan has made up his mind, he won't interfere. The blonde offers to contact the host herself, knowing him personally, and Johan thanks her by calling her by name Gita. After Johan thanks Gidu, a screen appears on the screen saying to connect with producer Sun Jinchul from the MBS channel. Gaidu, crouched on the floor, picks up the phone and interjects with surprise. Is this really journalist Kim? He introduces himself and, clarifying, asks Sian if he's busy with the broadcast right now. On the other end of the line, the producer is relieved to hear from Gidu and asks if he's safe. Gidu, lowering his gaze, informs him that he's actually calling to relay important information. Johan, looking at the phone screen, says that biker from the news is probably his co-worker, and an unsettling suspicion is heard in his voice. One of the men in the studio rises abruptly, holding the phone to his ear, and interjects in a panic, not believing what he's heard. He turns pale, freezes in mid-conversation, and stunned repeats what he's heard, as if he doesn't fully realize what it means. After gathering his thoughts, he interrupts the broadcast, apologizing to his listeners and citing an urgent call. He starts the music, puts away the microphone and is left alone, staring at the screen as if trying to digest what is happening. Left alone in the studio, the man interrogates on the phone whether the interlocutor is really sure of his words. He is told that there are many rumors about the motorcyclist, but among them there are plenty of outright false ones. The journalist on the other end assures him that he is vouching for his reputation. Everything he said is true. The man's eyes widen and he freezes, digesting what he has heard in a complete daze. Meanwhile, outside the studio, a crowd rages, shouting demands for an explanation for the unfair appointment of the chairman. The fire continues to rage, and the hero panics as he stares at the flame-covered skyscraper, surprised that even journalist Kim has recognized the seriousness of the situation. In the radio studio, one of the men explains over the phone that if even a journalist is talking about it, then things are really bad, and clarifies if their colleague is still around. The guy in the sweatshirt turns around with tension, while the other, sitting on the floor, is glumly silent with his phone in his hands, absorbed in what is happening. On the other end of the connection, the man with an anxious look on his face introduces himself as the one with the motorcycle, as if that should explain everything. He gets a brief response, after which the voice on the other end states that it wants to ask a question, and the pause becomes almost palpable. The silence on the other side of the line breaks, and the man in the studio explains that for his listeners, someone who isn't bitten by the infected has become a symbol of hope. He looks into the camera with a serious face and says that such people are the last hope for those who are cornered and have lost everything. The guy opposite, slightly flustered, hears a direct question on the tube: is he really invulnerable to the bites of the infected? He freezes for a moment and lifts the collar of his jacket slightly, as if about to do something important. After a brief pause, a discreet but significant confirmation sounds from the tube: yes. Johan sits surrounded by the contorted faces of the infected and calmly says he doesn't know the reason, but they're not biting him. The man in the studio, after listening to the story, clarifies that the infected show almost no aggression towards Johan and react weakly to his voice. Johan turns away and admits that he is not the man the radio host says he is, nor does he consider himself a hero. He explains that although he has been able to help some people because of his specialness, he is still just a person with a disability. The girl, after hearing his confession, remains silent, not knowing what to say. Johan looks over his shoulder tensely, as if he's feeling someone's gaze on him. He presses a finger to his lips, telling the others to be silent, and tensely listens to the sounds outside. Rustles outside the door make him cringe, and he whispers quietly that there's something there. The doorknob trembles and he instantly raises his weapon, holding his breath. The silence is broken by a scream, someone outside calling for help, and Johan freezes in indecision. Johan flinches when he hears something so unexpected on the phone that sweat breaks out on his forehead. The voice on the other end of the line hoarsely states that he will personally go to the studio, despite the night and the danger. The phrase "you want to come to the studio yourself?" comes out with surprise and a slight sneer in response. Johan frowns and says firmly that if it's the only way he'll be believed, he's ready. He grudgingly agrees, adding that if the zombies haven't bitten him, it should go without a problem.